That's great. That's great. Thank you so much for stopping by on the platform. First and foremost, I apologize about the delay. I want to thank you for stopping by. This is definitely an honor.
Yeah, no problem about the delay. It's good to be with you. Where are you located?
Definitely, definitely. I'm currently in Nashville, Tennessee.
Uh-huh. Nashville. You're on the other side of the country.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, now where are you in Cali?
I'm near Seattle. I live on an island off the coast of Seattle. An island of about 23,000 people. It's not a small island, but it's
Hmm.
not a big island either.
Wow. Okay. Seattle is a very, very cool city. I'm a world traveler. I've been all around the world. And, they always have those lists of like the best cities. Seattle is definitely always on that list.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool place. A lot of cool people come from there. For the viewers who may not recognize you, let them know what your name is. And definitely, what do you do?
Okay, are we on the air now? Are we ready?
Yeah. Yeah. It's pre recorded, so I can edit it.
Okay. Well, I'm John Perkins, and I'm a former economic hitman. I wrote the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's a trilogy now, with the last edition being about China's economic hitmen. And I was an economic hitman. Actually, my official title was chief economist at a major US consulting firm. But my real job was to identify countries that had resources our corporations wanted and arrange huge loans to those corporations. It's a long story, but those loans were basically what we call debt traps to lure the countries into our own sphere of influence, basically creating an empire.
Wow. Okay. Okay. You've been doing some tremendous work. Now I can ask you this. Now, when did you develop this passion for writing? Is this something that you've always wanted to do, write books, or did you just kind of get into it later in life?
No, it's actually started as a kid. I was an only child, and I spent my summers in the woods of New Hampshire with my parents who had their own projects. It was a very lonely life, really. I spent a lot of time talking to the trees and hanging out in the woods and on the lake that was right there. But on rainy days, when I couldn't go out, and it was a very small cottage we lived in, I started very young creating my own world while I was sitting there in that cottage with the rain falling outside. And I started with stick figure cartoons and eventually worked my way up to writing short stories. And then I wrote my first kind of novel when I was, I think, fifth grade. I've always loved to write, still do. It's my passion. I write all the time, even when I'm not trying to get something published.
Wow. Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. I mean, writing is cool. I mean, it's creative, but for me, it's like stress relief. You can kind of escape for a moment and focus on your writing instead of thinking about what happened yesterday or 10 years ago or what's going to happen tomorrow. You can kind of
Right.
lock in.
What kinds of things do you write about?
Well, I only wrote one book so far, and it's a history book. I do a lot of genealogy work, so I trace family trees and roots and stuff like that. So the book is specifically about the history of my family, the Great Migration, the African Americans leaving the South, coming up to the North during the 1920s. And it kind of goes into the 1960s, the civil rights and Black Power movement and stuff like that.
Wow.
In
When did
Cleveland.
you, what?
In the city of Cleveland. That's where I'm from. So I kind of talk about, because I don't know if you know this, but the city of Cleveland elected Mayor Carl Stokes. He was the first African American ever elected, of a
Mhm.
major city. So it was a
Right.
lot of things going on. Interesting.
Yeah. So when did your family come to America, or when were they brought to America?
Man, we came on the boats, on the slave ships, and then we worked our way up. So my great grandparents, they come from like Alabama and Georgia, and then like I say, during the 1920s, they started going up north to the Clevelands and Detroits and Chicago's.
Do you know where in Africa your family originated?
Yeah, yeah. So I visited about 20 African countries. I lived in South Africa for a year. I lived in Ghana for a year. I was just in Madagascar for 6 months. So according to my DNA, I think the biggest percentage was like from the Nigeria area, the Yoruba people. But I got some from all over, from Central Africa, Southern Africa, a little bit of East.
What a rich heritage, really. What a
Yeah, it's
rich
interesting.
heritage. And when did they come to America? Do you know that? When what slave ship or when?
Well, I'm still trying to find that. So, unfortunately, the African Americans aren't listed on the census records until about like 1870. So after the Civil War. So that's pretty much as far as you can go, unless they were already free. But I have found some slave schedules. So I found the plantation, I found who owned it, and I got the slave schedule listed. So I'm still working on it. So I haven't made it all the way back to a slave ship in particular or a specific part of Africa per se.
Uh, are you aware? I just heard. I tuned into at the end of a program on NPR the other day that was
Hmm.
talking about the Pope, and apparently the Pope had many black African relatives,
Wow.
and I think they said like of 12 that they can trace back, 8 of them owned slaves. So you had these black people owning slaves also, which I wasn't, well, I guess I was aware of, but not to that extent. And the Pope dates back to that. And apparently some of that was done so a family might put somebody else, a distant family member, put them in slavery in their family to protect them from being put into slaves, in a white plantation type of setting. So they became kind of family members. It was something I'm not aware of, but I'd like to research more, and that would probably interest you too.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely interesting because it's so vast. Because you have two parents, you have four grandparents, eight great great, 16 great great, 32 great great great, 64. It just keeps multiplying. So you really only, a lot of people only associate with their father or their mother's name, but it's probably 100 different names, that you can
Yeah,
attach yourself to.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that some more. That's very interesting. Now, I wanted to ask you definitely about the Economic Hitman trilogy. What inspired that, and how long did it take to write something like that?
Well, when I stopped being an economic hitman in the early 80s, I started to write a book about that. And I wanted to be an expose that included other stories from other economic hitmen and the jackals. And as you probably know, the jackals, if a president doesn't accept the economic deals that we want to get him to accept, that'll basically enslave his country in debt, then the jackals go in. And these are people that either assassinate leaders or overthrow them in coups. And that's, pretty common practice. The United States has a long history in places like Chile with President Allende, who was overthrown in a coup and replaced by Pinochet, and Arbenz in Guatemala, and Mossadegh in Iran, and Lumumba in the Congo, and Diem in Vietnam, and on and on. So I wanted to contact both the former economic hitmen and jackals and get their stories. But as soon as I started reaching out to them, I got anonymous phone calls threatening my life and that of my infant daughter. And I took these calls seriously because I'd seen what these people could do. So I stopped. I stopped writing the book, and at that time I didn't have a job. I'd quit being chief economist, and but I was taken out to dinner by the president of Stone and Webster Engineering Corporation, which was a competitor of my company's in Boston, my former company. And he said, you have a great resume, John. You were chief economist at one of our competitors, and we'd like to use your resume in our proposals. You won't have to do any work for us. Just let us use your resume, and I'm prepared to write you a check tomorrow morning for $500,000. Just don't write the book. So I'm kind of getting played the same way that I played presidents of countries. Like, here's a lot of money in this hand, and on this hand we got a gun if you don't want to take the money. So it was an interesting position to be in. And you can ask yourself, what would you do in a situation like that? And I'll say I took the money, but with the money, I went back to where I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer in the Amazon area of Ecuador. And and I'd heard how badly that area was being devastated. Now the forests were being destroyed, and so I went to the indigenous people, the Shwa, who I'd been with years before, and said, I want to help you guys. And I ended up, forming a nonprofit called Dream Change to help them. And also I wrote 5 books on them and their struggle to change to protect the environment and shamanism. And that was fine with Stone and Webster. They didn't mind me writing these books. Well, I didn't write the book that I really wanted to write. And then 9/11 happened. And I was deep in the Amazon on 9/11. I'd taken a group of people. I take groups, and if people want to join me today, I still take groups deep into the Amazon, into the Mayan people of Guatemala. You can go to my website, johnperkins.org, and join me. But I was there with a group of people on 9/11. But when I came out, I went up to ground zero, and as I stood there looking at that smoldering pit, I decided I had to write this. I had to tell this story. But I also decided that this time I wouldn't tell anybody I was doing it. They can't threaten your life. They can't do anything. And once a book like that, once you've got a manuscript done, it's in the hands of an agent and publishers, it's like an insurance policy, because at that point, anybody that might want to kill you knows that if they did that, you'd become a martyr and they'd sell a lot of books. So I decided to just write a personal story, a confession, and not tell anybody I was doing it. So that was, after 9/11. So really, although I could say I spent my life writing this book, I really started writing it after 9/11, and it was published in 2004.
Wow. Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. Now I can ask you this. If you could talk a little bit about your experience or what you wrote about in terms of Panama and Ecuador, the leaders of those countries, and what they were propositioned with and what was the ultimate outcome.
Yeah, so usually, most of these presidents would accept ideals because, first of all, here's a lot of money for your country. Take out this loan from the World Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank or one of the sister organizations. And that money would have to go directly to an American corporation, one of the big construction companies like Stone and Webster or Bechtel or Halliburton or Brown and Root, to build big infrastructure projects in the country. Things like power plants and highways and ports and airports, things that benefited a few wealthy families in the country who owned the big businesses that could really utilize better electricity, ports, airports, highways, etc. And of course, our corporations made big profits, but the majority of the people suffered because money was diverted from healthcare and education and other social services to pay the interest on the loans. In the end, the principal couldn't be repaid, and that's when we would go back in, usually in the guise of the International Monetary Fund, and demand concessions from the country. You can't pay your loans, so sell your oil or whatever the major resource is real cheap to our corporations. And incidentally, I forgot to mention at the beginning, we made these countries that we singled out were ones that had resources that corporations wanted, like oil, for example, and today lithium and cobalt and rare minerals, etc. So we go back in and say, hey, since you can't pay your loan, you give us your collateral, sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies without environmental or social regulations, and let us build a military base on your soil, or vote with us on the next United Nations vote against Cuba or whatever. So we were really creating this empire. Now, so doing this, but the other possibility was that the president wouldn't accept this deal, and then the jackals would go in. And of course, after a few of these jackals went in, as they did with Allende in Chile, throughout Latin America, that's not a very strong message. So most Latin American presidents after that accepted our deals because they knew there wasn't any point in resisting, because if they were killed or overthrown a coup, they'd be replaced by someone who would buy the deal. But 2 exceptions, and where Jaime Roldos, the democratically elected president of Ecuador, and Omar Torrijos, the head of state of Panama, They wouldn't play the game, and they were clients of mine, whom I personally knew. And you know, it was I was in an interesting position because I wanted them to accept my deal. That was my job, to get them to accept the deal. But in a side of me was beginning at that point. This was in the late 70s. I'd been in this job for about 7 years, and I was beginning to question it. At the beginning, I thought I was doing the right thing, because business school teaches you that that's how you help a country grow its economy, is by investing in infrastructure. But after about 7 years in there, and partly because of Omar Torrijos teaching me, I began to really question it. So I was, in a way, happy to see these guys stand up to me and not accept the loans. But I also was concerned because I knew the jackals were there. And both Roldos of Ecuador and Torrijos of Panama died in private plane crashes within 3 months of each other in 1981. Very, very suspicious airplane crashes that most people who really looked at this believe were assassinations.
Oh wow. Yeah, you made a great point. Like you say, most people, if they have to choose between ultimately dying or accepting a large sum of money, a lot of people, they're gonna take the money. But I can ask you about the Chinese economic hitman. Is it a similar situation, or is it like totally different, in terms of strategy?
Well, the goal is the same. And that's, if China wants to take these resources and become the number one superpower in the world. But its economic hitmen are actually a lot more efficient than ours these days. And I taught at a course, an MBA program in Shanghai, and I realized when I was invited there, after I got there, that what they really wanted to do is pick my brain about what I'd made mistakes doing as an economic hitman and what I'd done that was successful, so they could learn from that. And they have. So this is an interesting map. Now this is 2020, so it's 5 years old now. But you can see, in the year 2000, the United States was the number one trading partner with about 80% of the world's countries. By 2020, that had totally switched to China. And it's gotten even more so. So, like, some of a couple of Latin American countries were still with the US in 2020, but now have turned to China. So in less than 20 years, China has taken over. Its economic hitmen have been incredibly effective. And it also, the other side of the coin is that there's a tremendous amount of resentment around the world of the United States. People want to come here because they see it as the land of milk and honey. And they like Americans. When you go abroad, you're usually well liked. But the policies, the fact that we build military bases on their soil, I mean, who wants a military base from a foreign country next door? Uh, and the fact that we impose these conditionalities and essentially steal their major resources creates a lot of resentment. And so China's economic hitmen go in and they say, we're not going to do this, which is only somewhat true. It's mainly not true. And the goal is the same. But they do have different policies. They don't dictate to countries what kind of politics they should have. They've created this new Silk Road, which is extremely attractive to many of these countries, that they say you can become a member of the new Silk Road. The list goes on and on and on. I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but the short story, the summary is that China's economic hitmen have been extremely successful, and the United States has made some big mistakes. Another one of those mistakes I need to bring up is that we devoted so many resources after 9/11 to Afghanistan and Iraq and forgot about Africa and Latin America pretty much. China didn't do that. They didn't invest they didn't go to war with anybody. And instead, they invested in seducing and winning over Africa and Latin America. And incidentally, all the 54 African countries now have gone with China as far as number one trading partner.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned earlier, I visited about 20 different African countries, and that's definitely something that I hear people talk about. I guess the Chinese coming into Africa and building infrastructure, or them doing deals with African countries. And let me see. Now I can ask you this: when I was on your website, one of the questions that you may have, I guess, posed, what can I do personally, like as a average citizen? Is it anything that we can do? Because we hear the information, but is it anything that we can do?
Well, I think that one of the main takeaways from all of this is that we are creating through this system, which we could call the economic hitman system or predatory capitalism, we're creating what we call a death economy, an economic system that's polluting and consuming itself toward extinction. And that to a large degree is based on war or the threat of war. So it really is a death economy. And its guiding principle is that we need to maximize short-term materialistic consumption for everyone and short-term profits, maximize short-term profits for corporations. And it's really taken us, as I think we all know, to the brink of disaster. It's created tremendous problems. So, we have serious problems, climate change, income inequality, starvation in the world, malnutrition, racial discrimination, and gender discrimination. We have these huge problems, but the overriding problem, which causes those, is this thing called death economy, this economic system that places so much emphasis on materialistic consumption. And the alternative is a life economy, an economic system that will pay people to clean up pollution, harness, corral all the plastics that's floating around in the ocean and recycle them, regenerate destroyed environments, replant trees and fill in old mine pits and, take care of the land, create new technologies that recycle and that don't use fossil fuels. And we've been on that direction. We've been moving in that direction. Electric cars, solar and wind power. We've been moving in that direction at least until this most recent administration, which has set us back a little bit. So your question about individuals, we need to commit ourselves to transitioning from a death economy to a life economy, and that'll take care of most of these other problems, because a death economy is based on maximizing short-term materialistic and corporate profits. A life economy is based on maximizing long-term benefits for all life. And how do we do that? We move forward. We've been, like I said, we've been on a trajectory that's been headed in that direction. So I think we all know about, personal things we can do. Don't use as much fossil fuels. Get onto a plant-based diet as much as you possibly can. So on and so forth. We all know those small things that we can do, and they're important, partly because they're very symbolic, and we can go beyond that. And I like to tell people to ask yourself 5 questions. I don't know. Do you want me to go into those?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So the first question is, what do I most want to do for the rest of my life? What'll bring me the greatest satisfaction, the most bliss? Because if we don't do that, we're not successful. We might make money, but we're not successful unless we're doing what we really want to do. And I would answer that question by saying, I want to write. I love to write. I really, really enjoy writing. So I want to keep writing. And I have a friend who's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. He's a carpenter, and he says, I want to work with my hands in wood. The second question is, how do I do this in a way that helps to transform the death economy to a life economy? And I would say, as a writer, I'm going to write books that inspire people to do this. And my carpenter friend would say, I'm going to only use sustainable materials. And I'm going to hire somebody to replant the trees for every tree that I use in carpentry work. So the third question is, what's stopping me? What's holding me back? What's the blockage that's keeping me from doing what I most want to do in a way that'll transform the death economy to a life economy? And as a writer, I might say, well, I know that to be a successful writer, I have to write for at least 2 hours a day, and I just don't have time. And my carpenter friend might say, my clients don't want to pay the extra price for sustainable materials or to get me to plant trees. And so that's the blockage. Well, we all have these blockages. It's a voice that comes from a parent or a spiritual leader or a teacher or whatever it is. I'm not big enough. I'm not small enough. I'm the wrong color. I'm the wrong gender. Whatever. We have these voices that tell you you're just not good enough. You can't do it. So what is yours? As I ask people to really look at what's blocking you. And then the fourth question is, when you really reach out and confront that blockage rather than running from it, rather than denying that you're blocked, when you really look at it, well, how does that change your perception? Because when we change perception, we change our reality. We change our actions, and then that changes our reality. And I might answer that as a writer by saying, "Oh, well, I could turn off the television for 2 hours every night and write, or I could get up a little earlier in the morning and write." And my carpenter friend says, "Well, I can tell my clients that the extra price is not a cost; it's an investment in the future for them and their children." And then the fifth question is, what do I do immediately? What actions do I take? And that's the writer writes. And then the carpenter starts building with these sustainable materials, cabinets, houses, whatever, and telling his clients that's what he's doing. So there's those five questions. And I think I encourage people to ask them frequently, because the first two may not change that much. What do I most want to do for the rest of my life? How do I do this in a way that helps to transform the death economy to a life economy? That they may stay the same for a long time. But the next three, what's blocking me is going to change, because once I've decided that I'm going to write inspirational things, then the next blockage is 2 hours. But once I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and do this, then maybe a blockage is, well, what do I start with? What's the title of my book? What's the subject matter? What's the theme? And then after that, the question is, what's the first sentence? So those last three questions, you probably have to ask yourself fairly frequently. I like to wake up in the morning and it only takes a minute or two to just quickly run through them and start your day by understanding what actions you need to take today to further this. It's a good practice. And it's a lot of fun, and it leads to great satisfaction, because it leads to us doing what we most want to do in a way that's going to benefit ourselves and our future generations.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Now I wanted to ask you about this. Now you released a book this year. If you could speak about that.
Yeah, Message from Pleiades. And it's a novel. It's the first novel I've published. I wrote them before, but never tried to publish them. And it takes place in Tikal, in the jungles of Guatemala, in this ancient city. And it's interesting. It was an interesting book to write, because I wrote it from a woman's standpoint. And she's a young senator in the United States Senate, the youngest senator, and a woman. And she goes to this sacred site in Guatemala with a Mayan shaman, who takes her on this journey, if you want to call it that, into enlightenment. And she starts to deal with, where do our thoughts come from? Where does any thought come from? Where do ideas come from? Voices. Where are these voices coming from? The Mayans believe that many of the voices we hear, what drives us in our lives, are from Pleiades, because they believe they came from Pleiades, or at least some of them do. And so she's dealing with this. And I gotta say, it was so much fun to write this book, and I think people have a lot of fun reading it. And it's only digital at this moment, so you can get it anywhere you buy digital books. But the author is actually J.P. Moody, which is a pen name that I used. I wrote it, but it's J.P. Moody with John Perkins. So it's sometimes a little hard for people to find if they Google it, because it's not under my name. But it's J.P. Moody, or Message from Pleiades. It was just just really fun to write, and I've been told by a lot of people that it's a lot of fun to read. It's got a mystery, it's got mythology, it's got adventure, it's got this incredible setting, and it's got science fiction.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. Now I can ask you, have you thought about maybe doing a film or something of that nature. How they turn the books into films, because it sounds interesting.
Well, yeah, for Confessions of an Economic Hitman, the film rights of the original book, the first one, have been sold. And yeah, there's a filmmaker working on that. And there's a couple of other filmmakers doing a couple of other projects that relate to it. But, and to my life, uh, I don't give these things much thought. If people who are legitimate filmmakers come to me and express some interest, I'm always willing to listen. And I love the idea of film because that's our biggest media these days, But I'm not a filmmaker, so I love to write. So I keep writing. And if somebody wants to make a film, great. I'd love the more people that I can get this message out to about transforming a death economy to a life economy, and about the terrible mistakes that we have made as a country. It's fair to say I believe that I'm a very, very loyal American. And I believe that to be a loyal member of a democracy, we have to criticize what we see as wrong, because the only way that we get better is to understand our mistakes and try to correct them.
True indeed, true indeed. You definitely getting the message out there. Almost 3 million books, 35 languages. That's amazing. It's inspiring. Now for the viewers, if they want to check out your work and keep up with what you're doing, and if they want more information about the tours and different things like that, what's the best way for them to do that? You have a website?
Yeah, johnperkins.org. It's all there. And we'll take you also, if you want to buy the book, it takes you to, but it's available everywhere. All my books are available everywhere. But yeah, johnperkins.org. I'm not a com, I'm an org.
Okay, okay. Well, this has been a great interview, and I want to thank you again for stopping by. I truly appreciate the work that you have done, and I definitely look forward to the work that you have coming in the future.
Well, thank you so much. My pleasure. I deeply appreciate what you're doing to get this word out there. Keep up your great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.